Last week, we explored how adding light can help create separation between light levels in our image and control our contrast ratio. Well, today I want to show you how you can achieve higher contrast ratio by removing light or using what's called negative fill. High contrast ratios are a key ingredient in crafting a cinematic look. If you've never heard of Rembrandt Lighting, I strongly suggest that you look it up. Maybe I'll do a future video on how Rembrandt used a lighting technique in his painting that is still considered a gold standard today in cinematography lighting. There are many ways to achieve a high contrast ratio, but one of the simplest is using neg, or negative fill. Negative fill is simply black cloth placed to block bouncing light from hitting our subject in certain areas. Lights has a unique property of bouncing off every object and surface. Any light source will end up reflecting off walls, furniture, and countertops, unintentionally illuminating our subject and filling in shadows. That's why you'll often see large black cloth on sets, to prevent unwanted light spill and control contrast. For example, on this shoot, we originally started with just the diffusers, but we wanted more contrast. So we decided to black out half of the left side. You don't need a large budget. Using even a small piece of neg can make a big difference. Now let me show you how I can dramatically increase the contrast ratio of an image by placing a single 42-inch black pop-up close to the subject. For this setup, you can see that we have a practical here in the corner, a lamp, and I don't have control of that lamp. It's not on a dimmer or anything like that. It's just on and off. And we also have a window. I use the curtains to control the intensity of the daylight coming in. And then I placed my key light next to the window to enhance the natural light coming in. And by using a key light, I can then control the intensity and the brightness level of my subject. My subject is going to be right here, this little object on the table here. But if we look around the room, we can see that we have a white ceiling, we have light walls everywhere. And what's going to happen, we also have those white marble-looking tabletops. And what's going to happen is all those surfaces are going to bounce the light back towards our subject. All three light sources, whether the lamp, the window, or the key light, are going to bounce, like that light is just going to bounce right back. And it's going to fill in our shadows on our subject, making it not more difficult, but less, we'll have less contrast because that light, that bouncing light is going to fill in those shadows. The first thing I need to do is expose my shot, and since I don't have control over the practical light, I'll have to expose for the lamp. I'll adjust my variable ND filter until I have the desired brightness level on the practical, in this case ND13. Now I can turn on my key light and raise its intensity until I have the desired brightness on the right side of my subject. I'll use false color to check exposure and separation. At this point, the shot looks pretty good, and I already have a pretty decent contrast ratio between the right side and the left side of the object. But what if I want higher contrast ratio? What are my options? I could increase my ND filter and increase the intensity of my key light, but that will affect the entire image, changing all the levels in my shot. What if I want to leave the brightness level the way it is and simply darken the fill side to increase that ratio? So let's bring in our neg as close to the subject as possible and look at how darker that left side of the object gets. If we check our false color, you can see we have the lighter shot on top and the darker shot on the bottom. And so if we look at this left side, here on the light side, before we put in the neg, we're looking at anywhere between 35 and maybe 25 IRE. And once we bring the neg in, we brought this down to anywhere between 25 and 15 IRE. So it's a big change, and it's confirmed looking at a waveform monitor. Let me bring the waveform. We have our light side, the first shot that we did on this side, and then we have the neg shot on this side. We can see how much darker this is. And what we want to look for on the waveform monitor is this area right here. This is that left side. And you can tell on the darker side how this has shifted compared to the other side. And so our levels here are about 30, and here is about 20 IRE. So we dropped this by about 10 IRE, and the rest of the waveform looks very similar. It really hasn't been affected. Our highlights stayed the same. Everything stayed the same, except that small little area of the image we're able to darken. Using neg allows us to shape our shadows in very specific area of our image. And if this one was framed slightly differently where we didn't really see the tabletop, I could have placed a piece of neg on the table and created shadow on the underside of our object, creating more contrast. And these techniques also work for outdoors. It's not just inside. Let me show you an example, a setup that we did outside. And on this shot, you can see how much light, so the sun is coming from somewhere in this area. And that's why we have a diffuser here to diffuse that light coming onto the key side of our subject. But you can see all this light concrete everywhere and even on the floor. And all of that is going to bounce light right back onto our subject, eliminating some of our contrast. And so all we needed to do was place the exact same 42-inch black pop-up as close as we could to our subject, and that's depending on the framing. So in this case, I couldn't move it any closer to our subject because my framing was a little wider. And we were then able to create contrast that way. If you want to see the shot, here it is. And so you can see now on the key side, we have some nice levels here coming from the sun and our diffuser. And then on the fill side, we have a nice contrast between the two sides. And that's what you want. I find that using neg is so useful that I always travel with my 42-inch pop-up that we just looked at, but I also have a larger 6x2 pop-up and a loose black cloth that's about 6x4 that I can just hang on walls or drape over furniture to control the bouncing light. Now, if I had unlimited resources, I would love to wrap everything outside the frame in neg. But most of the time, simply placing a small piece of neg next to my subject is enough to get the contrast that I want. I hope this was very helpful, and next time you're on set, try to incorporate neg and see how much more contrast and depth you can create in your shot. Even a small piece of black fabric can make a noticeable difference, helping you shape shadows and control light spill for a more cinematic look. Experiment with different placement and distances to fine-tune your contrast ratio, and don't be afraid to get creative. Thanks for watching this video until the end, and as a token of my appreciation, I'd like to offer you my free camera setting cheat sheet. Just follow the link below to download your free cheat sheet. Thanks again, and happy filming.